So welcome everyone to the second day of the Ubuntu Online Summit. We've got a very, very special plenary today. I'm joined here by Jane Silver, CEO of Canonical, who will be actually joining us to answer all the questions from the community related to Ubuntu, Canonical, open source, and in general. The way this works is that when you see ubuntuonair.com, there's a chat widget which you can join and you can ask your questions. Just remember to prepare them with questions so that we can see them, and then we'll be queuing them up for Jane to answer them for you. I think with this short intro, I think I'll leave up the stage for Jane, who wanted to give us a few words.
Thanks, David. Hey, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's always exciting when we do these community summits, and I know that this one's no exception in terms of the amount of energy and work and planning that's going on. So I'm pleased to be here. I'm currently in sunny, windy London. I know you all are all over the world, and I say we just dive right in. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. So the first question is a pretty broad question, actually. Santi is asking, where do you see the company headed?
Oh wow. I could take the whole hour answering that question. So I think we're at a really exciting time. There's always so much happening in the world of Ubuntu, but as I look across the areas where we're focused now, it's a very critical inflection point in each of the areas. You all see what's happening in terms of personal computing and the convergence of the personal computing experience. I'm sure that most of you saw the Microsoft announcement of a few days ago. I think the changes that are happening there are very exciting, both as a user and as a provider of a platform. I think it's great that Ubuntu is helping set the standards there and helping pave the way, and the fact that we've got phones actually out in the market now is a big accomplishment over the last quarter. I think will just help drive that the speed of innovation and the speed of product to market there for Canonical and Ubuntu in the coming year. That, as I know, has been a big topic in the online summit over the last couple of days already, helped give birth to the snappy Ubuntu core concepts, the work that we did around the phone, which was specifically to enable convergence and to enable the features of security and app isolation and things like that, have really set fire to Ubuntu in the Internet of Things market and around devices. And I think as the world becomes more connected, you hear people talk about software eating the world, that will continue to shape Ubuntu and shape Canonical in really, really dramatic ways. I think there's a flourishing there that we'll see particularly this year. And that same dynamic of software eating the world is driving a lot of growth in the scale out computing world around OpenStack, around cloud, around big data, and that's a third pillar of the Ubuntu story right now. And so it's interesting to see that all three of these are hitting a very significant growth and innovation and period of change at the same time. So I think we're in for an exciting 12 to 18 months, probably unlike any in Canonical's history and in Ubuntu's history.
Exciting time indeed. All right. So the next question is actually from Daniel Holbach. Is there anything you miss from the old days of Ubuntu and Canonical?
Daniel, that's a very good question. Yes, there is. There's certainly things. The opposite is true, that we have things now that I relish that we didn't have before, but things I miss from the old days. For people who don't know, I joined Canonical essentially at the very beginning in 2004. So this summer will be my 11-year anniversary with Ubuntu and Canonical. What do I miss? I miss being able to know everybody. There was a period where there were very strong personal relationships, not just within Canonical, but also with the community. And while for me personally, while some of those have survived over the years, the growth of the community and the growth of Canonical means that those personal relationships are harder to maintain. I know that the personal relationships within the community and within the engineering teams are still really strong, but for me personally, it's something that used to be very tangible for me, and now just through the sheer growth is harder. I also miss. There was an excitement in some of the chaos in the early days. Now, that doesn't mean I want to go back to it, but I remember, and specifically, Daniel, I think you'll remember some of those early UDSs of trying to make the schedule at 3 a.m. with Post-it notes spread over a whole wall of a hotel basement. And I think some of those experiences not only help shape Ubuntu, but help shape some of the things that we prioritize, some of our core values, our drive for being systematic, our drive for automation, our drive for transparency in the planning process. But there was also a real pleasure in those very formative early years.
All right. So next question comes from Mopak. Is the snappy model something Canonical views as the future of the desktop, as well as the server and cloud environments, or are the two set to diverge for the foreseeable future?
So, if I think I understand the question, I think the snappy model is absolutely applicable on the desktop and server, but that's not to say that the deb-based version goes away. There will always be a deb-based version that some people will want to use, but there's also a class of people who won't want to use that. So we're not, in no way are we moving away from the deb-based version. It's not a divergence between the two paths. It's two different ways of consuming the same operating system. It's still all Ubuntu at its core, but in some situations, I expect developer desktops to always be deb-based. I think that's just the nature of how that audience will want to consume them. They'll want to try different packages. They'll want to update at a package level, but there's a whole vast array of constituencies, of user bases, who won't want to consume the desktop in that way. When you think about large enterprises, particularly in a thin client kind of environment, they'll want the transactional updates and app isolation promises that the snappy architecture can give them. So I think both play a role. I don't think it's a divergence. I think it's just two different consumption models of the same thing.
All right, so next question comes from Greeny 214. With Mark confirming that Canonical will be bringing a fully convergent device later this year, can we expect a high-end device along the lines of the sadly successful Ubuntu Edge?
So you can expect a high-end device. I would not go so far as to say along the lines of the Ubuntu Edge. We put some things in the specs for the Ubuntu Edge, which were really pushing the limit of what the phone manufacturers do today. So, for example, the the glass was a pure sapphire glass screen as spec'd in the Ubuntu Edge, which we could do based on those production volumes. I don't expect a manufacturer this year to be putting that out in a phone. So it will be, you can expect a good high-powered phone there, but you shouldn't expect the precise hardware specs of the Ubuntu Edge campaign.
Sorry, I was battling with the unmute. I'm just going to get the next question. All right. So again, in the line of devices, Pablo Rubianis is asking, are there any tablet plans to release soon?
Nothing that I can talk about. No. I think the near-term plans for device releases we've talked about as publicly as we can in terms of some more additional upcoming phone models. You all know that Meizu will be shipping an Ubuntu phone, but nothing, no specific tablet releases to announce at this time. The tablet experience, though, is great. We demoed it, just as an aside, we were demoing it at MWC. We were demoing some of the convergence features and the transitions from laptops to phones to tablets. And while there's still work to do, I'm not saying that all that work is done, and I know the teams are driving hard towards that convergence. It continues to be just a show-stopping kind of experience, and so I'm very excited for when that whole vision comes together.
All right, so back to convergence again then. Alan Bell is asking, is convergence better than synergy between devices for users? And for our viewers who are not familiar with synergy, synergy is a software where you can share mouse and a screen between computers.
So I will admit to not knowing all the details of synergy, but I think convergence is more than that. I think convergence has several different layers to it. One is the notion of hardware convergence, which is part of what we developed as the original proof of concept around Ubuntu for Android, where the phone is the same device and it's plugging in keyboards and monitors and the experience changes, or docking a phone into the back of a clamshell device. And I think we'll see, I think there'll be a lot of change and innovation in that physical form factor. You see OEMs still experimenting with detachable screens and convertibles and all-in-ones, and I don't think we're at the end of that road. I think there's a lot of change that will happen in that regard, from augmented reality, virtual reality pieces to the Google Glass-like interfaces, but there's a whole range of hardware convergence that can happen there. That's beyond just sharing keyboards and mice. I think there's also a level of convergence at the software level, at the OS level, and this is where we're focused. One of the areas where we're focused with Unity 8 and ensuring that shell experience adapts and conforms to the consumption model, whether you're in a lean back 10-foot TV experience or a very close up and personal hold it in your hand phone like experience. And then there's also the implications for app developers of developing a single app, the much vaunted write once, run anywhere promise of convergence. So I think I think convergent, when we simplify all of that and say convergence, and I think it's a much deeper level of change in your personal computing experience than what I interpret, and may be wrong, but what then that I interpret is provided by something like Synergy.
Okay, so next question comes from Steve. What's your most important point which makes Canonical as a company special compared to other tech companies? Really nice question.
So I think there's two things, if I can be allowed two answers to to what's most important. One is, I think the people that work at Canonical are extraordinary. I think we have been able to attract and retain such a high caliber of person. I think that we're not for everybody. There's no doubt about that, but we have a very dedicated, passionate, super smart, sometimes scary smart set of people who work here, and it's a real pleasure. The international diversity is great. It's such an unusual. It's an unfortunately unusual thing to be able to work with surrounded by really smart people, and I think we have that at Canonical, and it's something that we try to nurture and maintain. The second thing that I think makes us different from other tech companies is, well, frankly, exactly this sort of thing. It's the balance between what we do commercially and as a company and with the community. We have an extraordinary amount of transparency. It's not always 100%. There are sometimes things that, for commercial reasons, we need to keep confidential. But the vast majority of what we do is quite open and done in collaboration with the community, and I think that's very unusual, and I think it's one of the things that makes Canonical very special. It's difficult, and we know people who've been in the community for a long time know that there's sometimes rough edges in that relationship. It takes work, but it's something that we value, and value in a way that we try to live and breathe those ideals, and have done for quite a while. And I think that makes Canonical a very special place to work.
Excellent. All right, so next question comes again from an old-timer, Daniel Holbach. Do you feel your job is getting harder over time with Ubuntu, joining more and more playing fields?
Oh, that's another good question. Is it getting harder? There are elements of it that are getting harder. As Ubuntu grows and as Canonical grows, there's just more going on. There's more going on than any one person can keep track of. And as someone who likes detail, who likes information, people who work with me know that I'm always asking for more information and asking lots of questions. It's hard to sort of accept that you can't know everything all the time, and that's just a matter of growth. On the other hand, some things are getting easier, because we as a company are larger, because Ubuntu, compared to the early days, is more established, because the world has changed in terms of its outlook on open source and its appreciation for open source. There are a lot of things that are just so much easier now. 10 years ago, we'd go visit customers who were try and talk to them about deploying Ubuntu. And those conversations would often start with what open source is and what it means and why is it good, and no, it's not scary, and yes, you should use it. And today, you just don't even have those conversations. They don't even exist. It's just taken for granted that open source is at least as good, if not a better way of deploying your IT infrastructure. And so in that respect, while we're still changing the world in many ways, there's not necessarily the same or as much swimming upstream that we were doing early on.
Right. Letired is asking, how many hardware partners has Canonical? Lately, we've seen an explosion of Ubuntu laptops and mini PCs.
Oh, I'm afraid I don't have an exact count there. I know that the number continues to grow. In fact, just today, I believe, or maybe yesterday, we announced a relationship with eBuyer selling some AMD-based HP machines in the UK. eBuyer is a very large UK retailer, and certainly on the cloud side, just I know is not exactly what you asked, but on the cloud side, we've had a real explosion in hardware partners as well. We run something called the OpenStack Interoperability Lab, or OIL for short, which is a lab where we work with hardware and software partners to build OpenStack clouds many times a day. Build it, test it, tear it down, build it in a different configuration, test it, tear it down. We build well over 3,000 clouds a month there, do a lot of automated testing on it, and build them in different combinations and permutations of partner hardware and software. And it's a very valuable thing, not only for our end customers, who then have insight and choice into which of their vendors components will work well together, but also for those hardware partners themselves to have a view into how their products work in the larger ecosystem. So both on the devices side and on the cloud side, the number of hardware partners is growing. I know that there's, I think, around 35 partners in the OIL program, and I'm afraid I don't know an exact count of device hardware partners.
Right, so keeping the line of partners and hardware, Victor Thompson is asking, I recently saw some news around the reseller named eBuyer reselling HP laptops with Ubuntu on them. Is there a market or a way to possibly find the reseller to perhaps do the same for a tablet like the Nexus 7 or others?
So the eBuyer relationship came about because we have an existing relationship with HP to do enablement of Ubuntu across their range of PCs. So I don't see an easy path to doing that with the Nexus 7 itself. There are a lot of smaller OEMs who are looking at Ubuntu on tablets. Our focus in terms of the Ubuntu software, as you know, is phone, which itself drives a large portion of the tablet experience, and getting us as quickly as possible to Unity 8 and that converged experience. Tablets will come along in the process, but I'm as I said earlier, I can't speak to specific tablet product announcements right now, but I don't, for the Nexus 7 specifically, I don't see that happening with an OEM or somebody like eBuyer.
All right, and we've got a question from Michael Hall from the Canonical community team as well. So I've got a question in two parts. One, what is your favorite app for Ubuntu phone? And two, what's the one app that you would really like to see on our Ubuntu phone?
My favorite app on the Ubuntu phone, which I'm going to liberally interpret that question to be my favorite app or scope on the Ubuntu phone. I would say a little bit to my surprise, I would say I find myself using the Today scope quite a bit. I use Telegram quite a bit and the music player app quite a bit. I'd say those are the ones that I oh, in the gallery, because I do a fair amount of photos as well. Those are the ones that I spend the most time in. Um, the app I would most like to see, oh, I think I'm probably like many other people, the app I'd most like to see is WhatsApp. I I I have I'm trying to rapidly convert everybody I know to Telegram, but I have some holdouts who are still addicted to WhatsApp. So that would be a high priority for me.
So related to that question, that comes handy because we have a question from Svish. Back at the Ubuntu Insiders event, you told me that you use Android because of WhatsApp. So did you finally convert your friends to Telegram?
I'm in the process. I have some of them converted to Telegram, and they've been. I have to say they've been fine. They haven't had any problems. They've been a little bit surprised at the lack of friction there, because I think people get used to a certain thing and they don't even really realize that there are options and alternatives, and so I think there's more perceived barriers to that changeover than real ones. I'm not there yet, though. I would say that I have some. There's kind of, well, there's such a strong network effect in all of those messaging apps, and so it's moving along, but I still have work to do. I still have conversions to do.
All right. Let is asking, shouldn't the Ubuntu shop or Canonical store link or sell Canonical Ubuntu partner or Canonical or Ubuntu partners hardware?
So I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing for us to link to those places where it's being sold. I don't see us ever selling it. We want to focus on what we do well, which is the software. The reason we partner with hardware partners is because they're great at building and selling and have the distribution channels of that hardware themselves. So I don't foresee us ever selling hardware in that way. I think we should and can, and at various times have linked to partners selling Ubuntu on hardware. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, it's a little bit harder to do than it sounds, because OEMs change their product lines quite rapidly and very dynamically, and put things in various markets independently. So someone like Dell will do a lot of optimization of which Ubuntu models are available in which market, and not all those decisions are taken centrally. A lot of those are taken locally in various countries, and so there's a constantly changing and evolving set of hardware available for sale in different countries at different times. It's not an excuse. It's still, I think it's a good idea. We should try to do that if we're not doing it now. But it's one of the reasons, for example, when you go to the Dell website, sometimes you see different versions of Ubuntu machines available at different times and in different countries.
So Cantalarago is asking, India has the second largest market in the world. Why isn't Canonical putting its effort in here, unlike their competitors?
So we do put effort there, and we ship a lot of PCs. Well, our hardware partners ship a lot of PCs with Ubuntu pre-installed there. There are a number of government organizations which use Ubuntu extensively. Most tenders that come out, tenders where a government organization or a university is going to buy PCs. In India, it's very common that those tenders have Ubuntu certification as a requirement. And partially that's from the good work that everybody does to make Ubuntu amazing, and it's being recognized as being an amazing experience. And part of it is work that we're doing in working with those government organizations and the writers of those tenders to really promote the importance of that choice, and that the industry should supply choices there rather than a single operating system. So we do put effort in India. We do it. It's a large market. It's a large country. We try to focus and that effort in places where it will have the biggest impact. But it is an important country for us.
The next question is from Mopak, and it comes with a bit of context first. So let me just read that first. Ubuntu has always been an OS to run on any PC hardware. The phone and tablet version so far has been the opposite. For small devices, Ubuntu is right now an OS for a few selected devices. Do you see mobile hardware becoming easier to integrate with, or are we stuck for now with each port being a big investment?
I think it will become easier to integrate with. We're not there yet, and it's interesting that one of the things we'd like to do, that we think Snappy Ubuntu Core can do, is help drive that to be easier to integrate with, where each port isn't a big investment. One of the things that happens right now in the device world and in the traditional embedded world is you get a bunch of snowflakes, you get a bunch of specific versions made for that specific device, and then increasingly they don't get updated, they don't get security updates and things like that. And I think one of the changes that we're trying to influence, both in the industry and in how people view OSs in general, is to drive more towards that fewer snowflakes and more reusable general platform work. It's one of the areas that we've explored a lot with the ARM community, and in particular with the group Linaro, which is a group of ARM SoCs and other people who are interested in the ARM ecosystem, to try and drive more commonality and more shared work upstream, and rather than having each vendor of an ARM chip basically replicate non-differentiating work. And the more we can push that upstream, the non-differentiating piece upstream into a common platform, and then allow those competing vendors just to focus on their differentiating piece, then the smaller the investment is to do each particular version, and we can get more generally reusable capability there. So I think it is shifting. I think there's still a ways to go there.
All right. And next question comes from Ziga. What do you think will be the killer device or feature in the Internet of Things?
The killer device or feature in the Internet of Things. Well, if I knew that exactly, we would go off and make it. And I'm more interested in what you guys think is the killer device or feature in the Internet of Things. From an Ubuntu perspective, we think that one of the key elements there is security. As things become more connected, as more things in your house become connected, as there's more CPUs and devices that surround you and your living environment and working environment, the need for trusted security at the platform level and at the app level will only increase. That's a very OS-centric view of what a killer feature is. I know, but I think that's what will dominate the news around the trends and innovation around IoT in the coming years. I think we'll see government legislation about needing updatable, secure devices and requiring them as they get attached to more and more significant parts of society and people's lives. In terms of sort of a user level feature, I think it will be how we interact with the device. I talked earlier about the idea that we're not really at the end of the road in terms of what the physical convergence is, and I think it will be the interaction method between people and your computing experience. The rectangular black pieces of glass are amazing in many ways. You know, if you compare that to what we were doing as short as 20 years ago, which is, well, if you all are old enough to remember, which is, you know, in the big scheme of things, isn't very long ago. It's amazing the power we hold in our hands and the power and capability we have in our pockets and purses. But it feels very limited when we think about the Internet of Things and all the things that are going to be around us. And I don't know exactly what that feature is, but I think it's in that area of how we interact with our computing environment.
All right, lots of questions coming in. I'm just trying to make a balance and pick a diverse range of questions from different people. I know that some of you are asking many questions, which are really good as well. So let me pick the next one. From Cantalarago, with Ubuntu taking 0.1% of the PC market and Windows Phone struggling with only 2% of the phone market, why bother with Ubuntu?
So I'm not sure I agree with the 0.1% of the PC market. I think we're more than that. I mean, the latest stats that I've seen are Linux in general is around 3%, and I think by any measure, Ubuntu is the vast majority of that. But still, to your point, that's not a number that's 90-some%. Why bother with Ubuntu? Because there's such a vast opportunity here. You know, I think that we're not done. This isn't the end of the road. It's if we were at the end of innovation in the personal computing market or in the cloud infrastructure or scale out infrastructure market, then Ubuntu probably wouldn't be that interesting. But we are so far from that. We are right on the cutting edge of just major change in how people use technology, both at a personal level and at a corporate enterprise level. And that change is happening so rapidly, and Ubuntu is right in the mix of all of that, from the devices and innovation happening in the IoT space to all of the scale out computing that's happening and enabled around cloud, to what I think is a lot of changes in the personal computing space around convergence. How can you not bother? Like, how could you not want to be involved in all of that? So I don't view the market and the opportunity as a percentage of the PC market, and that's why we bother. I think there's something much more significant and much more interesting at stake.
And for the next question, Mike is asking, what advice would you give to a current computer science student that is looking to build a career in open source?
That's interesting. What advice would I give you? I would say find an area that you're really interested in, and I mean something more specific than open source, because because open source these days is so broad. You know, every company is doing some things in open source, and you can be developing in open source, you can be working in a company and deploying open source software, you can be there's just it's almost it's I think as somebody entering the job market, it's almost too broad to think just in terms of open source. So I would think one level down from that of what you're really interested in. Is it the interaction with the community and the type of work that David and Daniel Holbach do? Is what you're really interested in enabling large scale automation, or is it the making something related to design and user experience and making things beautiful? And I think that will, and all of those things involve open source. So in terms of a direction, I would think about something a bit more specific about what you're interested in, and then find places in the open source community where they're doing that and get involved. I know from Canonical's perspective and from the perspective of many other companies, we look very closely at the community. We look at how people behave in the community, and we recruit from the community. Many of the people who work for Canonical joined the Ubuntu community first and caught our eye by doing great work. It's, as an employer, it's a great way to help judge if somebody's going to be a good fit as an employee. And it's not just the coding. You know, we are known in the Ubuntu community for valuing contributions other than code, and it's seeing somebody's real performance and how they interact is a great indicator for job performance. Interviewing is I was going to say it's a crapshoot. That sounds a bit too negative, but it's pretty tough. It's, even if you're a great interviewer, and I think of myself as a pretty good judge of people and a pretty good judge of skills, you get things wrong in an interview. People can do great, perform well in an interview and not perform well on the job, and vice versa. There's reasons why people sort of don't come across well in an interview. It's not a perfect indicator of performance, but past performance, how people interact with their peers, how people deal with uncertainty, how people deal with disagreement and conflict and difference of opinion, how people actually write code, how people live up to their promises, all of which you can see in action in the open source community, are really good predictors of performance. And that's something that we at Canonical have known for 11 years. I think, unfortunately, now a lot of other companies are catching on to that idea. But prove yourself by doing in something that you care about, I think, is the best advice I can give.
Excellent. All right, so John is asking, how much of the evaluation in the design process is based on user testing and how much is automated? In other words, where does Ubuntu stand on UX and usability?
Sorry, I missed the very beginning of that. How much of what in the design process is?
Yes, sorry, let me just reread the whole question. How much of the evaluation in the design process is based on user testing and how much is based on automation?
In the design process itself, it's much heavier on user testing. We regularly do both broad user research and user testing, and very specific. We think we've solved this specific problem, and we want to get some folks in to see if they interact with the UX the way we think they will. And so we'll do both spot specific testing and sort of broader, how is this version of, say, the scopes, or even we do user testing on things like Juju and Maz, as well. So in the design process, it's much more user research led than automation led. In the engineering and QA process, we it's much more automated. We do there are certain things that are manually tested that we need to, but wherever possible, we drive towards test harnesses and automated testing and integrated testing throughout the development process.
Next question, and I think I'm liking the question already, from Cheeseburg. How come we don't hear more from you as a woman working as a CEO of an open source company? You're much more interesting than a South African billionaire.
Thank you. Why do you not hear more from me? It's a matter of time and priorities, and we try to cover different areas. I'm enjoying this though. If you guys will invite me back, I'll come and do this at every Ubuntu Online Summit, and I'll try to continue to be interesting.
Excellent. Really looking forward to that, and I think everyone is. All right. So lots of those questions. So from Cheeseburg, what are your personal goals for the company?
My personal goals for the company. Some of them are financial, which I won't go into detail, but companies, the most obvious metric of success are financial, and that's something that I pay a lot of attention to. I also, at the sort of more abstract level, I want us to define the way that companies work, both in a very in some of the things that are special about Canonical. So, for example, I talked earlier about this corporate community balance. I think that's a really important concept about how companies work, particularly in the tech community. And I'd like us to continue to lead the way and master that. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's always challenges, but as a general goal for Canonical and the way Ubuntu is produced, I think it's a really important thing. I think we as a company, also in a similar vein, I think we as a company are doing really interesting things in being a globally distributed company. We hear a lot of things about companies that are encouraging more work from home or discouraging work from home and requiring everybody to be in an office. And there's pros and cons to both, but I think we're doing very interesting things in terms of defining the relationship, not just between the company and the community, but also between the company and the people who work there, and the type of people we are able to accommodate. There's certainly a series of very commercially oriented goals of milestones I'd like to achieve, of places where I'd like to see Ubuntu develop, of products that I'd like us to release, and they are in line with what you see us doing already. There's not going to be a major pivot of Canonical or Ubuntu, but across the spectrum of devices, personal computing, and powering this dramatic change in the data center driven by scale-out computing. I think it's amazing and super exciting that Ubuntu is at the heart of all of those. I think there's very few companies in the world who are playing those sorts of fields.
All right, next question from K1L. Do you see the Linux community becoming more and more a business field? Like there are more decisions taken for business reasons and not for technical or other reasons?
No, I don't think I do. I think there's still lots of decisions that are taken on general technical merits and on the basis of community discussion and the existing community governance structures, whichever they may be in a given community. I think there's certainly corporate interests at play, and as more and more companies get involved in open source or open source tooling that they've created in-house, they are to some degree always operating in their own self-interest. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I recognize that sometimes that's leveled as a criticism of, oh, that company's just looking out for themselves. Well, to a large extent, that's what their job is. So there's definitely a lot more corporate interest at play, but I think there's still plenty of space for the technical merits to win out and to drive roadmaps. And it's the people who write the code get a lot more say than oftentimes than the people who sit in the meetings. And so I think there's always a balance, but I don't think it's quite as negative as or doom and gloom as I interpreted the question to be.
All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. Pick up the next one. WXL, is Canonical close to making a profit yet?
Are we close? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about any financial numbers, but we're happy with our financial progress, and I think that's all I'm going to say on that topic.
All right, next question. Candelara was asking, the definition of open source varies with individuals. What does it mean to you?
So for me, I think one of there's certainly just a pure licensing aspect to it. But for me, I think one of the things that's important is the processes in the community and the collaboration that it implies. I think that, and while that's not necessarily in the technical definition of open source, for me, when I think of an open source project or a successful open source project, I don't immediately think of, are all the license files correct and is the code available as the sole determinant there. I think a healthy open source project is one where there is leadership, but also broad collaboration and ideally a sense of community around it. For me, it's as much a way of working as the end result of software with a particular license.
All right, next from Cheeseburg. How do you look at the failed projects, and you wrote failed with quotes, that have come from Canonical? For example, Ubuntu One, Ubuntu for Android, Ubuntu on TVs, etc.
Sorry, how do I look at them? What?
Yes, so how do you look at the failed projects that have come from Canonical?
So there are certainly things that we have stopped doing. Ubuntu One is a is a good high-profile example there. And we, I look back at those, and we do very thoughtful retrospectives of trying to understand why things went a certain way, using that to inform our strategy going forward. I think in some cases we missed the boat. We had the right idea and we didn't execute well. In some cases, I think we were early. So Ubuntu for Android, I'm not sure I don't consider that a failure. Yes, it's true. We never shipped that. But what we did do there was explore the early concepts of convergence, I think, before anybody else was talking about that sort of notion and that sort of product and style of interaction. I think it spurred a broad public conversation. It absolutely helped drive and refine our product vision. And I don't think that's a failure. I think part of being transparent and doing things openly is sharing early on. It's the seeing what happens before the big shiny press release. That's one of the benefits of working in this open community transparent way. I think Ubuntu for Android, Ubuntu 1 was different. I think Ubuntu 1, we knew that type of service was a valuable service. I think we entered the game late. I think we there's a series of reasons why I think it didn't take off, and I think we did the right thing to pull the plug. I think we need to focus. I think it's right to say no to the things that aren't working out. And I don't think there's any shame in having tried something and it not work. So they're not. I think the Ubuntu One team, many of the people who built Ubuntu One are still working for Canonical, and they're a great team building exciting new things now. And so it's not something that we're ashamed of in any way.
All right, next one from Ubu Lifehacker. Are you excited to see Microsoft bringing its developer tools to Ubuntu?
Very much. That was one of the interesting announcements out of their Build conference recently. I think it's another example of this change that's happening in the ecosystem. I think it's an example of the acceptance and the value of open platforms, but also heterogeneous computing environments. I think there's strong statements about interoperability. I think it was a great announcement, and we have a very strong relationship with Microsoft. There's a number of areas where we cooperate. On the server side, Microsoft has announced an open compute project, an OCP server, and which runs Ubuntu. We did a joint announcement several months ago at the OCP Summit in San Jose. Ubuntu is a first-class citizen in terms of being a guest operating system on the Azure cloud, and have very strong relationships there. I think it's another case where things have changed a lot since Ubuntu began, and that I think we're seeing the continuation of this evolution in just very exciting ways. I think there's no place more interesting to be right now than part of the Ubuntu community.
Excellent. All right, so we're running out of time. I think I'm going to just speak the last question, and then we'll wrap it up here and finish the plenary. So when Ubuntu is done, all bugs are fixed, and Ubuntu powers everything from fridges to TVs to drones to the clouds. What are you going to do next?
I'm going to rest. I'm going to go somewhere. I will take all of my Ubuntu-powered devices with me. I will go someplace warm and sunny, and from that remote, warm, sunny place, I will talk to all of you about how great our Ubuntu devices and experiences are. But there's a lot of work to do before we get there. But it's been a great first decade with Ubuntu and Canonical, and I think we're all striving to make the second decade of Ubuntu and Canonical even better. And I thank you for all of your participation and support of that. I think the things you do in the community are incredible.
Excellent. Exciting times indeed. All right, then. So I think, as I think we'll wrap it up here. So just to finish up, thank you everyone for your questions. Thanks a lot, Jane, for joining us at the online summit and in this Q&A. You saw that everyone is very excited for you running the session. So we're looking forward to seeing you more and more.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone, and see you in the next sessions.